Good morning and welcome to the Invited Language Learning Roundtable Symposium for the 2022 AAAL Conference. I'm MJ Curry.
And I'm Theresa Lillis.
And we're grateful to Lourdes Ortega for inviting us to organize this symposium. At the same time, we are deeply saddened that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to affect our ability to gather in person for events such as this. And because of that, it's really unfortunate that most of the presenters are not able to travel to Pittsburgh to attend this event. We very much appreciate the efforts of all of our presenters to make video recordings of the presentations they had planned for the conference. And we're hoping for some live conversation between the videos, depending on how technology goes. We'd also like to express our gratitude toward Language Learning Journal and to AAAL for enabling us to make this video that can be looked at after the symposium. So to contextualize the focus of this symposium, we'll first give a brief overview of the trends in research on the topic of multilingual scholars writing for publication that have emerged over the past 25 to 30 years. Then we'll preview the symposium itself. So a growing body of research has traced the emergence of pressures for multilingual scholars to publish in journals that are included in specific indexes, many of them using English only. Researchers, including us, have explored how scholars respond to such pressures and make choices to enact their specific interests and commitments. One strand of work has examined the features of text from linguistic and rhetorical perspectives, while other strands have focused on the extent to which scholars have access to resources that they need for publishing, such as research funding, time, library resources, and support with preparing text by people that we've called literacy brokers. The open access movement has been considered from the perspective of increasing access to journal articles in particular, as well as the risks posed by predatory open access publishing. We've analyzed the ideologies of publishing gatekeepers, such as editors and reviewers, in terms of their attitudes toward the language used by multilingual scholars, and the identification of multilingual scholars as working in locations that automatically seem to merit less interest than research coming from global centers, which are often Anglophone. Despite the heavy focus on the presumed dominance of English in academic knowledge production, interest in how multilingual scholars use the full range of their linguistic repertoires has also been visible in recent work on multilingualism and the ways that digital tools, including translation tools, can support the use of multiple languages and varieties.
So today, this symposium aims to extend some of the strands of work that MJ has mentioned by focusing on three important dimensions to scholars' practices of writing for publication. And of course, whilst we're foregrounding the practices of multilingual scholars, we consider the issues raised as being fundamentally relevant to all scholars working in the academy. So the first dimension we focus on is the role of evaluation regimes in the lives of academics, as manifested in the policies that structure how academic work is assessed at departmental, institutional, national, and transnational levels. The second dimension we focus on is the question of epistemology and the extent to which academic knowledge produced outside of Anglophone centre institutions, particularly from the Global South, is or is not accorded status, legitimacy, and cultural symbolic value. The third dimension we focus on today is the impact of digitally mediated practices and how digital technologies and practices are shaping publishing and knowledge making globally. So the aim today is to explore these three dimensions through three conversations between scholars who are working in interrelated fields of knowledge making and publishing. Each conversation is made up of brief recordings by each scholar, followed by hopefully live conversations. So the first conversation centers on evaluation regimes and involves Lynn Nygaard from the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Norway, and Haiying Feng from the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing in China. And the two questions that structure their presentation and the discussion are, what do we know about evaluation regimes nationally and transnationally? And how do these affect scholars writing for publication practices, including the languages used and knowledges produced and circulated? The second conversation centers on epistemologies and involves two scholars, Andiswa Mfengu from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and Federico Navarro from the O'Higgins University in Chile. The two questions that structure their presentation and discussion are, how are epistemologies and knowledge-making practices from the Global South posing critiques to the practices and ideologies of the North? And secondly, what are the implications of these critiques for journal gatekeeping practices, systems of academic evaluation, and publishing practices and pedagogies? I think MJ is going to talk through the third conversation.
Thank you. So the third conversation focuses on the impact of digitally mediated practices. The conversation takes place between Melba, Libia, Cárdenas, Beltrán from the Universidad Nacional in Colombia and Guillaume Gentil from Carleton University in Canada. They'll be addressing the question, how are changes in digitally mediated systems, platforms, practices, and resources shaping opportunities for academic knowledge exchange transnationally through, for example, open access publishing and digitally mediated translation practices. And finally, we will have space and time for discussion and kind of a wrap up after the three conversations are presented. We really are grateful to people for joining us either in person, so early in the morning, or through Zoom, assuming the technologies are working. Many thanks to all.
Many thanks for coming. Thank you.
Hi, this is Lynn Nygaard from the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, and today I'll be talking about geolinguistic bias in evaluation systems. What do we mean by evaluation systems? Well, evaluation systems are ways that institutions, journals, or groups of people can evaluate their progress or their productivity. It's a way, for example, to rank institutions against each other, or journals to rank against each other, or to look at people and in hiring processes or in promotion process to see how productive they are and to be able to compare them to one another. You can use different kinds of data for doing this. Some systems are based on at least a partial qualitative assessment. For example, the REF in the UK, there's a committee actually reading some of the documents to see and to rank them. Other systems rely mostly or primarily or almost in 100% on quantitative assessments. For example, they'll use citation data or information about the publication. What makes it so difficult to design an evaluation system to be used equally well for all scholars is that academic writing processes practices are very highly situated across the academy. In the STEM fields, you have almost only journal article publication. For example, very few books or book chapters. There's a lot of authors per publication. There's a lot of authors produce a number of articles per year. And there are journals with a higher impact factor because of the way citations work. And citations often happen very quickly right after the thing is published. Whereas in social sciences and humanities, you get a different picture. You have a wider range of outputs. You have more book chapters, more books. You have fewer authors per publication, much more solo publishing here, fewer outputs per year, and fewer journals with higher impact. Citations also take a longer time to build up. And there's a higher rate of publication in local languages, in for example, Norwegian in our case. So what this means is that the indicator has, the way they decide things, for example, how do you count authorship matters. For example, if every author is given full credit for each publication, then in the STEM fields, you're going to get automatically much, much higher counts because they're involved in many more publications per year than you would get in social sciences and humanities. If you fractionalize, that is, if you take a percentage of the credit goes to each of the authors, then it becomes a bit more equal across the fields. Likewise, if you count only journal articles, it's going to benefit those in the STEM fields. If you count a wider range of outputs, these are going to help people in social sciences and humanities. Where does language come into this? Well, there's a very strong link between language and discipline. Most language, local language publication happens in fields in the social sciences and humanities. And this is largely because a lot of these fields work on policy relevant things that are very important for the local environment. For example, things to do with social welfare, education, and local reforms in these things that make very little sense to publish in English, or certainly if they are published in English, it requires so much contextualization that it's very difficult to get to the point. Non-English publications also receive fewer citations. So if you're using a citation-based system, then those who write in local languages will be in trouble with that. And if you use some of the commercial indexes, a lot of non-English journals are simply not part of that. To give an example of how things work in Norway, here Norway is a country with about 5 million people, and 87% of our academic publications are in English. It's a very strong push towards internationalization. And part of this has to do with this idea of uptake, that we think that because Norway is so small, then the number of people we can reach with Norwegian language publications is bound to also be small. And if we're talking about a topic that has even any relevance at all to other people in the world, then it should be in English because it's more likely to get greater uptake. Where we do see Norwegian publication, it is in the social sciences and humanities. We've also Norway's developed its own regime for measuring productivity. We call it the Norwegian model, or the formal name is the Norwegian Publication Indicator. And its purpose is to distribute funding at the institutional level. And this is quite important to know, that instead of having the purpose to compare individuals as a way, to be used in promotion or hiring, it is meant to compare institutions. And the idea is that we'll look at part of the way that funding is distributed is based on how the productivity is of each institution. The more productivity you have, the more money you will get. What is impressive about the system is that it covers absolutely all journal articles, books, and book chapters published in Norway. It's mandatory reporting, and is reporting for the entire higher education sector, medical sector, and the research institute sector. What we count as academic publications are things that have an original idea. So in other words, textbooks fall out of this definition because those are considered to be a summary or synthesis of the existing field, that you don't have your own spin on it. This is of course debatable, but this is the way that we've decided to do it, that we count things that are original contributions to the discourse. That would also mean no translations. They have to be book chapters or articles that are published in peer-reviewed channels. So they cannot be something that has not been peer-reviewed, for example, a commentary or book review. And it has to have an ISSN or ISBN. Some of the important things that fall out of this, for example, are high-level reports. We do quite a few of these working where I work, high-level reports to, for example, the United Nations or to the EU, and these are not counted at all, even though they're very important outputs for the people in our institute. All languages are accepted. What is important is that the channel has demonstrated routines for peer review. Scopus and the Web of Science, for example, are in a different position. These are commercial enterprises. They definitely favor journals as opposed to other things. They do say that they have some books and book chapter coverage, but as we'll see in a minute, this is not very well covered. They tend to favor English language and English language journals, and I think this is probably because they need to assess the quality, and they probably don't have the ability to assess the quality in other languages. And it tends to favor STEM fields over social sciences and humanities. A lot of social sciences and humanities journals simply do not appear in these indexes. And to illustrate that, we'll look at a comparison of the things that appeared in the Norwegian index, and then compare how many of these appeared in Scopus and the different Web of Science indexes. And what we see is that for the publication in English, there was pretty good coverage. especially in the natural sciences and technology, the coverage was around 90%, and this is not bad. When we get to the social sciences and humanities, however, it takes quite a dip, especially in the humanities, where in Scopus it's barely over 40%, and in the Web of Science in their core publications, it's barely up around 40. When we look at the Norwegian language publications, on the other hand, it's significantly less. Now, these are publications that are captured by the Norwegian system, and they are quality controlled. So we know that these publications exist, and they exist in channels that are respected and quality controlled. And yet they are barely covered at all in Scopus, and Web of Science is not even a blip, barely. Another way of looking at this, we looked at a different set of data and broken down more fine-tuned fields. And we see that in the natural sciences, the 87% of the things that were covered in the Norwegian system were covered in the Web of Science, which is pretty good. As you move down, getting towards social sciences and humanities, this is reduced further and further and further until you get to the humanities, where barely over 17% is covered in Web of Science. Well, what does this mean now? This means that people that are in the geolinguistic periphery or semi-periphery, they often have to choose between being relevant for a local context or getting international recognition. And this is a difficult side of negotiation for quite a few people. They have to decide where how they want their career trajectory to go. Do they want to have relevance for example, Norwegian ministries and the kind of work that happens in Norway? Or do they want to take a chance and be relevant for other countries? And this might, I think, also has a very strong gender component, which we won't be talking about here today. But what we do see is that Norwegian is dying as an academic language. In other words, so there's so much pressure to publish in English that you'll see Norwegian researchers say, well, everything I read is in English, everything I write is in English. I don't even know how to talk about these things in my native language. I don't know the words. I know the regular words, but I don't know the technical terminology. I don't know what to call these things. And this means that there might be an increased inequality in hiring practices, where people who have published quite a bit in local languages might find themselves poorly compared to their counterparts that publish a lot in English. And I'll leave it at this point here, and I hope we can discuss this more in the discussion. Here are some of the references for things I've been talking about today, and I look forward to talking more about evaluation systems and how they affect people in the geolinguistic periphery.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Theresa and Mary Jane for inviting me to participate in this roundtable. My discussion today can be seen as a continuation of my 2013 study published in Language Policy. While my 2013 study examined the impact of China's national going out policy on scholars' publication practices, my discussion today is going to review how China's national and institutional policies on academic publishing and evaluation have gradually changed as of 2018. My study was based on analysis of national and institutional policy documents, social media posts, and interviews with 6 scholars and 1 administrator. And I'm going to discuss here basically 3 issues. First of all, the diachronic change in national and institutional policies on academic publishing and evaluation. Secondly, scholars' view of what motivates the policy change. And thirdly, scholars' attitude toward the policy change. Now, let's first of all take a look at some of the background information. As we know that China's GDP last year was almost double of its GDP in 2013, and the general expenditure on R&D increases to 2.44% of GDP, very close to the OECD's 2.47%. Now, this rapid increase in research investment yields, of course, rapid increase in research output. Having this as the background, we witnessed a change in China's national policy as regards academic publishing and evaluation. While in 2013, the Chinese government put forward the going out policy that encouraged scholars to publish in international index journals, in 2020, the Chinese government proposed the so-called domestic international double circle policy. Now, very interestingly, both policies began as an economic policy, but then extended to other areas, including academia. The domestic international double circle policy emerges as a response to Trump administration's decoupling policy. It aims to employ a new development pattern by making full use of the domestic resources and domestic market, while keeping open to the outside world, i.e. the so-called international circle. It aims to strengthen the nation's own innovation ability and try to be independent in all aspects, the so-called domestic circle. So when it comes to the academic publication, more specifically, there is a slogan, publish your research on the motherland. In other words, scholars are encouraged to produce knowledge within and for the nation given the external curbs on China's sci-tech development because of the groundless China threat theory. Then a series of national policies that are directly related to academic evaluation began with a policy document issued in July 2018 by the General Office of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council entitled On Deepening the Reform of the Evaluation Regimes of Research Projects, Scholars, and Institutions. It was then followed by a jointly issued notice by 4 ministries in the same year entitled On Launching a Special Campaign to Eliminate 4 Priorities Evaluation Regime. And here, 4 priorities refers to the evaluation regime that prioritizes publications, professional titles, academic degrees, and awards. And this was then followed by a number of more specified policy documents in 2020. One was issued by Ministry of Science and Technology entitled Measures to Reject the Misorientation of Publication as the Top Priority in Science and Technology Evaluation. Another document is entitled Several Guidelines on Normalizing the Use of SCI in Higher Education and Establishing Correct Evaluation Orientation. This one singled, as we can see, singled SCI out. The third document was released by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security and the Ministry of Education, entitled Guidelines on Deepening the Reform of the Professional Title System in Higher Education. Then in 2021, a number of universities have reformed their institutional promotion and rewards policies in accordance with the aforementioned national policies. If we were to summarize the major changes, then we can see a shift from going out to bring in by supporting the development of high-quality national journals, and a shift from using bibliometrics as evaluative device to using peer review of representative work. A shift from treating publications in international index journals as more valuable to treating both international and local journals as of equal value. And a shift from neglecting teaching achievements in promotion and rewards to treating them equally as research output with specified conversion coefficient. Then how do scholars perceive the policy change? In their opinion, what motivates the policy change? The interviewees all agree that the policy change which began in 2018 can be seen as the Chinese government counter-reaction to the geopolitical change. To use one interviewee's words, Trump administration's bully boy tactics let go some of our illusions to integrate their discourse system. Some originally hidden problems have become more prominent. For instance, one interviewee mentioned that some scholars in humanities and social sciences stigmatize our nation in order to publish their articles in international index journals. And some scholars have the centripetal drive to publish in high-ranking international journals, but care very little about the contribution of their research to their native country. A very good example is Gao Fu, the director of China CDC, whose behavior in the spring of 2020 has aroused heated debates on social media. Problems also include some scholars' unethical behavior or publishing in journals that charge author fees. The rapid increase of China's research output has made it possible for the government to address these problems and reform the evaluation regime by shifting from focusing on quantity to quality. Then how do scholars feel about the policy change? Data analysis reveals that on one hand, most scholars, despite all kinds of concerns, welcome the policy change. Some social media posts argue that China's current research finding and research orientation are being led by the Web of Science indexes, which results in a plethora of copycat research and scarcity of theoretical or original research or research that addresses local issues. On the other hand, however, scholars have doubts about how to implement the change and the effect of doing so. Su Xingning, the father of CSSCI, for example, argues that the value of the evaluation devices like SCI or CSSCI should not be completely denied. What we need to abandon is not SCI, but the priority of SCI. Swinging the pendulum from one extreme to the other will cause chaos in academic evaluation. Scholars also raised questions about whether to publish research on the motherland would narrow the readership of their research and hinder the international academic communication, and whether our local academic infrastructure like journals and the peer review system is ready to embrace the policy change. Some scholars even sharply critiqued that the new policies in rejecting the four priorities regime are actually setting up new biased rules that prioritize some publications over others. Interestingly, scholars because of their different positioning and prior statement, hold different attitudes toward the policy change. And similarly, universities of different regions and tiers are also at different stage of reforming their regime. So the findings I report here, I believe, exemplify how a strong government can drive the change of the regime in a few years' time. However, the effect is yet to be seen. I hope my report could provide some useful insights for the study of evaluation regimes in other countries. Thank you.
Greetings, I'm Andiswa Mfengu, and I bring greetings from the African continent, South Africa. And today I'll be sharing on how epistemologies and knowledge-making practices from the Global South and posing some critiques to the practices and ideologies of the North. And so today I've crafted my talk around a subject we should all care, and this is coming from the fact that current knowledge practices encourages epistemic injustices, and it reinforces these colonial structures where information from the North and writing in the English language is more valued. Researchers are discouraged from publishing in non-English, such as local languages, because this is seen as that they will receive less citations, and of course their work will be even read less, and also in terms of they'll receive no international recognition basically, and they might struggle to get reviewers in the sense that when one is applying or needs to have international reviewers. So then almost suggesting that researchers should be writing in the English language, and that is more important if one needs to progress in academia and generally as a researcher. And also we see that the map, which is shown, very little coming from the Global South, and they need to redraw this very unequal knowledge map. And this is what was published by the Conversation in 2015, and also another article that was done by The Guardian, which talks about Africa produces just 1.1 of the Global South scientific knowledge. And this is actually not just a phenomenon in Africa, but across from the Global South. but then also looking at publishing practices and pedagogies. We've seen a trend, prioritization for researchers and academics to publish in journals with high impact factor, and also the prioritization of articles versus outputs, and quantitative measures of success, such as your H indices, citations, journal impact factors I mentioned, also views, downloads as seen from international bibliographic databases such as Scopus and Web of Science, which of course there's also focus mainly on English, and they do not index resources that are actually non-English. And a lot of our local journals and regional journals from Africa or even just the global South do not necessarily make it to the standards of this big bibliographic indices. And the drivers behind these publishing practices and knowledge-making practices that we've seen is coming from academics and researchers applying for tenure, they're applying for probation, promotion guidelines, that they need to tick these certain boxes for them to be promoted and things like that. And also funder requirements. We've seen international funders and even local funders where they're asking researchers not about the quality of their publication or their work, but asking them about where is that work being published? Has it been published in Nature rather than the South African Journal of Science? And also we've seen that one is competing with other researchers. So one needs to follow these rigid and northernized practices in order to get published, in order to get funding to do the research. And also greater emphasis and prioritization of research outputs versus outcomes and impact. Then I think looking on the other side of the coin, by all those practices and different knowledge-making practices, who is excluded? I think that's a great question that's worth asking. So journal keeping practices, who gets published, and author names and author affiliations, do they matter in terms of this journal gatekeeping practices? And in a study I did as part of my PhD, which was looking at research impact assessment at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. This is some of the extracts from what the researchers shared. One researcher mentioned that the publication process can be crippling for early career academics because it is biased and racist, and gatekeeping takes place as it is an elite environment. And many early career researchers find that they don't have the correct surnames like Smith to be allowed to publish within certain journals, and of course referring to mostly journals coming from the North. And another comment was that if your surname is Numalo and not Jefferson, it has a different kind of feel in how it gets cited. And this just shows how the unbalanced and also exclusive space when it comes to publishing, and which finds a lot of researchers from the global South being excluded from, and also so the marginalized voices, and they need to bring those to the forefront. And so I'm thinking, then it comes back to why should we care? And just some extracts from a few authors from the global South. So Dr. Reggie Raju, a director from Research and Learning at the University of Cape Town Libraries, commented that the major publishing houses have inadvertently northernized the publishing landscape. And an author, an African author, Ngungi Watyongo, mentions that those that write in African languages remain invisible. Their works are hardly ever reviewed or translated. And this is not just unique to Africa. This has been seen also for the rest of the global South, whether one looks at South America or one looks at Australia. And then in this case also, so we see the inequalities, and the inequalities are brought about by different contributors in the space, and they need to make this research, whether you're writing in a local language, whether you're publishing in a local journal or in a regional journal, making it accessible and equitable, and also making the global publishing space more equitable from researchers from the global South and researchers that are researching in different contexts and in different languages and different spaces, so that that actually acknowledging of the diversity and acknowledging the different contexts that researchers are coming from. And the accessibility and equitability will help us to make that research discoverable, visible, and we can see one way of actually changing that knowledge map that we've seen in 2015 and hopefully in the years to come. So then I'd like to see a need for a paradigm shift, and what we've seen is that a lot of one can write and do quality research, but if that research is not relevant to the North, it will not get published. And of course, the North would want to publish what is relevant to the global North and what will sell, because at the end of the day, it is the global North that has the money to pay and purchase these different journals and publications. So there's a need for a paradigm shift. Things cannot remain this way. And I mean, we've seen a call for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And this also needs to apply in terms of knowledge making processes and practices. And one of the researchers, when I did my study, commented that the institutions, and this does not only apply to institutions, applies to governments and to even countries, need to decide what is valuable and then valuing those things in policies and practices that we use. So we cannot say as an institution, as a country, as the continent, and as the global South, that we value our researchers doing research in their context, we value researchers writing in their own language, while then we actually, when it comes to promotion, when it comes to tenure, when it comes to funding, we actually do not build this in there, and we actually recognize them like simple things as open access. If we don't recognize open access, like we recognize high impact journals, then we're actually not doing justice to our researchers. Hence, the behavior will not change because we're actually not changing what we're valuing as institutions. And one way that the African continent has been doing as part of academic libraries, so libraries publishing a service where the University of Cape Town and other libraries in the continent have developed a continental platform for open access publishing. So to make sure that those works that cannot be recognized in other places, that they actually can be published and accessible in the African continent. So changing how we value research and how we assess it, recognizing the diversity. The global South is not one huge continental area, but we all are diverse, and the need for collaboration, having meaningful and responsible approaches that are flexible, broad, and context sensitive. I don't think that's something we can stress a lot, but thank you very much. I have some sources that you can have a look at. Thank you very much.
Decolonial studies have pointed out that modern-day coloniality is not a matter of military and material colonialism, but a more subtle and pervasive epistemological and symbolic enterprise. A Eurocentric and US-centric, English-dependent, center-to-periphery paradigm of knowledge-making. You can see on your screen the North-South divide proposed by Willy Brandt in the 1980s. So, modern-day coloniality is, as Maldonado Torres puts it, a coloniality of knowledge. The geopolitical location of scholars, texts, and languages impacts the politics of academic knowledge production. Interestingly, this means that northern English-based knowledge production is located in a supposed zero point of observation, as Castro Gomez calls it, or an unmarked locality, as noted by Lillis and Curry, and this produces seemingly universal claims. Let me share some data with you to illustrate this point. I will refer to some of the most prestigious and influential journals in writing studies and applied linguistics. I will specifically refer to Web of Science index journals because evaluation regimes in many countries, such as mine, use this database to give grants and promotions, and they are also relevant for university rankings. Let's take written communication, for instance. It claims to be an international multidisciplinary journal that publishes theory and research in writing. However, 73.2% of the authors published in the journal between 2016 to 2018 are based in just 7 Central English-speaking countries or regions, namely the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, New Zealand, and Ireland. And 100% of the papers were published in English, of course. Moreover, 90.5% of the editorial board members are based in the same Central English-speaking countries, which is not very international, to tell you the truth. Another example, the Journal of Second Language Writing. It aims to contribute to current understandings of central issues in second and foreign language writing and writing instruction. But again, 7.5% of authors and 80.5% of board members are based in just 7 English-speaking countries or regions. There is certainly little room for non-English speaking authors who try to participate in this international conversation. College Composition and Communication is even more local. It publishes research and scholarship in rhetoric and composition studies that supports college teachers. But all authors and all board members are based in English-speaking countries. So again, it's pretty challenging to join this conversation that our peripheral non-Anglophone institutions want us to join. And of course, it is neither an open conversation nor an equal exchange. There is a colonial distribution of intellectual and scientific labor, a Western geopolitics of knowledge, according to Mignolo and Walsh. Northern researchers produce and distribute theoretical models and knowledge about the world that Southern researchers adopt and apply, even if those theories and claims are not totally relevant to their contexts. At the same time, third world developing countries often provide data, indigenous languages, at-risk educational systems, alternative writing teaching programs, sometimes collected through tools and protocols developed in the North, such as CLASS, to be processed or at least co-processed at the symbolic laboratories of the developed North. Similarly, findings from the center are replicated in the periphery for confirmation or adjustment. Moreover, Northern research agendas have a validated global reach, and when a European or US scholar becomes interested in a Southern topic, then such topic becomes valued both locally and internationally. It is as if the findings is real only when the West gets to know about it, claims Kanagaraha. That's why peripheral scholars are expected to draw from Northern theories and authors to interpret and support their claims. Third, Southern authors cannot afford not to know, unquote, Northern scholarship. In Segator's terms, my translation, we accept the absolute lack of reciprocity when we willingly feed our texts, often without a real need, with clippings and references to authors from the North, pretending to join their intellectual genealogies in a membership fiction not validated by their counterpart. Let me share some more data now from the periphery. I quoted 15 randomly selected research articles written by Latin American authors in Spanish and Portuguese and published during a decade in special issues on writing in journals from Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. I distinguished the language and the location of citations, Latin American or non-Latin American, for the first author's institutional location. And I also distinguished the function of the citations, state-of-the-art or framework. First, please notice that 71.1% of citations are from outside Latin America. This is important as it shows the high influence of Northern scholarship. Scholars located in Latin America are quoted both to demonstrate that there is a field researching reading and writing, what I call state-of-the-art, or to draw theoretical concepts, what I call frameworks, but scholars outside Latin America are mostly quoted to refer to theory in an impressive 85.9%. That is, Latin Americans do research, occasionally make theories, while non-Latin Americans primarily lend their theoretical apparatus for that research to be possible. It is also worth noticing that 74.9% of quotations drawn for theory building were originally written in English, French, Russian, or Italian. In sum, there is a transversal, typical quotation pattern that reinforces colonial dynamics. As Santos claims, colonialism is a co-creation, so the coloniality of knowledge is also reinforced in and from the periphery in a colonial cross-fertilization dynamic. To confront this coloniality of knowledge, there is an urgent need for scholars located in non-central, non-Anglophone countries to promote epistemological disobedience, as Mignolo puts it. That is, a radical alteration of the ways of belonging to a transnational community of practice. This position includes regional theory elaboration and quotation, attention to local needs to elaborate global claims, and the development of situated accountability criteria, together with the usual and frequently enriching borrowing of northern theories and experiences. But this effort should also include scholars and institutions in the north. Central journals also need to consider non-English speaking literature and traditions to promote north-south research collaboration. This process might involve publishing quotas and attention to internationalization metrics for authors, for editors, scientific boards, and peer reviewers. Journals could publish articles in languages other than English, together perhaps with an English translation, and citations to non-English traditions should be promoted and praised. At the same time, central scholars should really wonder what is to be learned from Southern theories and experiences. Decolonization means, as Maldonado Torres claims, an invitation to engage in dialogue and a desire for exchange, as well as rejection of a totalitarian approach to knowledge, and I am quoting Garcia and Baca here. This is a political call for social justice in global research that actively contests historically unequal configurations and epistemic violence, as claimed by Mignolo and Walsh, while at the same time promoting cross-fertilization between nations, languages, and identities. If you're interested, those are two forthcoming texts where I elaborate more on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane and Theresa, for the invitation. I would like to concentrate on the construction of authorial identities. Particularly, I will tell you about Novice Authors in Profile, a publication edited at Universidad Nacional de Colombia in Bogota. I created this journal in 2000 and I have been its editor since then. Initially, the idea of Profile was to disseminate the works of school teachers and teacher educators participating in a professional development program. But little by little, we got the interest of local and international communities who challenged us to face the process of becoming an international academic journal. Profile is mainly concerned with sharing the results of classroom research projects, reflections and innovations undertaken by teachers of English as a second or foreign language, as well as teacher educators and novice teacher researchers. So we believe that professional knowledge is enriched by different members of our academic community, and the journal welcomes papers from different parts of the world, different educational levels, and different settings. The incorporation of academic standards for scientific publication has been recognized at national and international level. And we are very pleased to show you this classification that we have reached. and particularly in the areas of education, linguistics, and language. And although that classification is not the priority, this is something that motivates us to check to what extent we are reaching the communities we had in mind when we engaged in the consolidation of profile. As part of a narrative study that I conducted, I decided to concentrate on constructing life stories of novice authors because I wanted to document their experiences as writers whose experiences are linked to childhood and the place writing has in their academic development in their professional career. I worked with 7 novice authors with different backgrounds. Some of them were school teachers, others had just graduated from BA programs. A couple of them were doing MA programs, and 2 of them were engaging in doctoral studies, and 1 had just finished her PhD. I used documentary evidences from the editorial processes of the journal, and I also conducted a series of interviews. The life stories of these participants inform us about the different experiences they face. They tell us about a series of events and situations that have to do with their experiences as students, as teachers, as professionals, and as writers. They also tell us about the complexity to write, to consolidate manuscripts, to submit the articles for publication, how they feel about feedback that they receive, and how they process evaluations, and how they face rejections. And in some cases, the authors who have been like more experienced, and especially the ones who have moved from institutions to higher education, they tell us about the role they now play as reviewers. The construction of novice authors' identities in profile give us the chance to examine commonalities. And these commonalities were grouped into 3 loops. And they are very much connected to the evolution of authors along their professional careers. First, we have the first steps in research and publication, the challenges to approach research, to face academic writing, and the role that mentoring plays in consolidating a first manuscript, and the experience and the incentives and the satisfaction of having published a first article. Then we see that they feel some sort of encouragement and motivation to move forward. So they feel that having published a first article is not enough. They feel that it is very important to engage in advanced studies, MA programs, doctoral studies. They feel very motivated to spread the word in different contexts. And some of them become very interested in guiding others. And for some authors, the incorporation of the reviewing process is very important because they are invited to be part of editorial boards, particularly national publications. All these authors tell us about the objectives that they set up to be new writers, and especially for those more experienced, they recognize that they are consolidating academic writing competencies. They feel more committed to accompanying others. All the participants recognize that to be successful writers, you need to be very critical, and that critical attitude is going to be vital in order to guide others. They also recognize the responsibilities of reviewers to help other authors fulfill their goals. We interpret this work with novice authors as the possibility of transcending the status quo, because by paying attention to not only experienced authors, of authors who come from particular elites or groups that experience publication as something very normal or frequent, we are paying attention to the role we play in decision making. Evaluators, I mean reviewers and editors, play an important role in giving voice or denying the voice. That means allowing the publication or not allowing the publication of a manuscript. Authors recognize that when they are given the chance to get published or when they are rejected, they feel that there is some sort of empowerment. In both cases, they recognize that they are learning and that they are exercising different kinds of skills in order to advance in academic writing. All of them are very much committed with the idea of sharing, spreading the work in different scenarios. They recognize that they can start by sharing their work at local level, and at the same time, they can have the chance to establish global dialogues with a wider community. And at the end of the day, what they are saying is that by exercising some sort of agency, they are contributing to knowledge society. And this is very important because as one of the participants mentioned, if you allow different voices to be present in a publication, you are having a seal on the professional career of the authors. And that is the reason why I would like to leave you with this reflection from one of our participants who mentions how significant this opportunity has been in his professional career. And now he feels very committed to guiding other people. He's very responsible about the role he plays as a reviewer. And so he mentions that we can determine the possibility to develop a professional career by allowing authors to be visible in a publication.
Hello. I'd like to begin by thanking Mary Jean Curie and Theresa Lillis for inviting me to this roundtable, and Language Learning and AAAL for sponsoring this event. What I'd like to explore with you is to what extent machine translation could be a welcome or perhaps worrisome disruption in writing for publication. Up until recently, the quality of machine translation was subject to ridicule. A good example of this is Google Translate Sings, a song series created in 2014 for a YouTube channel. To create the lyrics for the songs, Melinda, an American singer and songwriter, submitted lyrics of well-known English songs to Google Translate through several iterations, from English to other languages and back to English. And through that process, she created very funny lyrics indeed. However, 2016 was a major game changer in machine translation, with the transition from statistical to neural machine translation, or NMT, which relies on artificial intelligence, multi-layered artificial neural networks, and deep learning. So Google Translate adopted NMT in 2016, and competitors like DeepL and Microsoft Bing quickly followed suit. This resulted in a remarkable improvement in quality. This improvement in quality has caught the attention of academic publishers. For example, following a successful pilot with DeepL, Springer Nature, which publishes Nature among many other journals, has announced in a recent press release that they would be offering free auto translation service of books and manuscripts to all book authors. And this has been branded as part of a bigger move toward open science by reducing language barriers and also cost of production. To illustrate the quality, but also the limitations of NMT, here's an example from an article published in Language Learning by Peter Robinson on the noticing hypothesis. I've chosen this article in part because it was published by Language Learning, our sponsor, and also because the noticing hypothesis is well known in second language acquisition, and yet the concept can be a bit tricky to translate into French. So I submitted the title and the beginning of the abstract into DeepL, one of the best available NMT systems. And for those of you who could not appreciate the French translation, I copied that translation into Google Translate to translate back into English so that you can compare the original English and the Google Translate output. So what we can see is that the translation is pretty good in that it is grammatical and intelligible, but there are a few problems. For example, the noticing hypothesis has become the notice hypothesis. The level of noticing has become the note level, and the distinction between consciousness and awareness has been lost, which raises the question as to whether it was important in the original or just an elegant variation. So it's important to realize that the quality of the output can look deceptively good because NMT systems are programmed to optimize fluency over accuracy. In other words, it can generate fluent output that sounds good on the surface and that can pass as human-like, but this output does not always make sense and can contain translation errors such as missing or questionable meanings. As we've seen, NMTs do not handle terminology well, in part because they're not trained on specialized academic language. They do not handle pronouns well either, so a word like hypothesis can be referred to by the pronoun she rather than it, because the French equivalent word hypothèse is feminine, not neutral, and also because NMT systems do not currently consider context beyond sentence boundaries. Of note, NMT systems also reproduce the biases of the data they're trained on. So for example, all pronouns and inflections default to the masculine. And so for all these reasons, machine translation requires a fair amount of pre and post editing for good quality results. Finally, of note, NMT requires massive training data and computing power, which means it's better for some language pairs than others. Importantly, current NMT systems have been designed for gisting purposes to help you get the gist of, say, a web page in a language you don't know at all. They've also been designed to assist professional translators translate into their first or dominant language, but they have not been designed as an aid for alturators who, unlike translators, are often ill-equipped to post-edit MT output in their second or weaker language. So given this current strength and limitation of NMT, I'd like to leave you with two main questions. First, how can we help develop machine translation literacy among scholars, publishers, journal editors, so that everyone can have a better sense of what machine translation can and cannot do? And related to this, how can we teach machine translation literacy in languages for research and publication courses? Second, how can we help ensure that machine translation opens rather than closes plurilingual spaces for the construction and communication of academic knowledge? Because I can really see machine translation being used both in support of or against plurilingualism. On the one hand, it could reinforce the hegemony of English, and it could do so in at least three ways. First, it could demotivate English scholars from learning other languages because relying on machine translation is just easier. Second, it could reinforce expectations for authors to produce English translations, putting the onus on them to fix translation problems and making invisible their multilingual writing processes. And third, it could devalue the work of professional translators in producing high quality translation. So what would the works of Bourdieu and Foucault read like in machine translation? On the other hand, machine translation could also be used to support language learning and thus help scholars develop plurilingual literacies. And it could also foster plurilingual publication practices whereby research articles are made available in the original language and in translation side by side, so that readers can go back to the original if they want to, and that they can better appreciate how different languages may afford different constructs, metaphors, and ways of thinking. We could even imagine opening forums for readers to suggest and discuss alternate translations. So in other words, machine translation could be used to keep epistemological spaces plurilingual, but the question is how could it be leveraged for this purpose? Thank you.